Hi, I'm Mariska, and this is my Action Research Multimedia presentation. So, first thing I'm going to start with is my statement of core values. So the first one is student success. So students should want to do well for themselves, not just for external factors, as well as students' ability to be successful should not be hindered by anything in their external environment. Student growth is the next one. So students should be provided with the opportunity to grow and learn from their mistakes. And then student learning, so students should have the opportunity to facilitate their own learning and explore their own interests. And these three kind of tie together the value that frames my research, which is motivation. So having the end goal in mind, students should want to do well and do their best, not settle with whatever they get done by doing the bare minimum. And students should welcome the opportunity to grow. So in order for students to feel successful and grow and learn, they must be motivated. Students cannot grow and learn and succeed unless they are equipped with the intrinsic motivation. We cannot simply force our students to care or to work harder, and I have often found in my personal experiences that students do not care much about the content or tasks unless there's some sort of realistic relevance to it for them. As educators, we must figure out ways that we can unlock the potential in our students so that they are intrinsically motivated to complete tasks and learn from their mistakes, grow with the feedback, and succeed by working to their fullest potential. So my research problem, the focus is on intrinsic motivation, and this came a lot from my personal experiences in my placements, especially my second placement. I was constantly bothered by the fact that students were content with receiving average or below average grades because that's just what they usually got, doing the bare minimum just to get through the work, and for some students they were disturbingly content with receiving zeros, and I was just horrified by that, and I felt as though it didn't matter how much choice I gave them or how much direction or how engaging the assignments were, they just weren't motivated to complete them. So I'm really interested in finding out strategies to intrinsically motivate students to do their best and strive for growth. There's a slew of reasons why I don't want to deal with extrinsic motivation. It just doesn't always work, and it doesn't work well with everyone. And my articles will kind of talk about some of the points why extrinsic motivation isn't the best way to go. We simply just don't want to train our students to only do things just because they're going to receive a reward once it's completed. So as teachers, it's important to instill the mind frame of intrinsic motivation in students early on so that students are always thinking with the end in mind. And it's important to teach them to have realistic goals for what they would like to achieve and provide support and strategies for how to get there. So my main question is, how can I intrinsically motivate them? And with that, I was also looking at how to inquiry-based learning in a classroom with high needs, because being a part of being intrinsically motivated is finding interest in what you're working on. So if students have the ability to facilitate their own learning, they might be more motivated to complete their work and find their answers and do well. So in a classroom with high needs, I've found it really difficult to facilitate inquiry-based learning, and I'd like to research some of the strategies for ways to introduce it in a more manageable way. In terms of intrinsic motivation, Dr. Khan sent me an article about the marshmallow experiment, which is you give a kid a marshmallow, tell them they can eat it now, or they can save it for a later time where they'll be given a bigger and better treat. So it kind of puts into perspective the extrinsic reward, which is the now, or the intrinsic reward, which is the goal setting for a later time. And it talked about how it seems like they're delaying gratification, so saying that you have to just continuously work hard and eventually you'll get your reward, when we should just be teaching our students that although that's true, they should also be discovering gratification, so they should be finding small things along the journey towards their goal that they actually enjoy, so that we can build resilience and independence in them. So definitions, intrinsic motivation refers to behavior that's driven by internal rewards. So an example of this would be if a student had an end goal of becoming a musician after high school, he would be more internally motivated to practice his instruments. And the opposite of that is extrinsic motivation. So it refers to behavior that's driven by external rewards such as money, fame, grades, and praise. So using the same example, if a student had the end goal of becoming a musician after high school, he could be extrinsically motivated to do this if his mom rewarded him every time he practiced. I also define students with high needs, and these are students who are considered to be at risk of educational failure or otherwise are in need of special assistance and support. So some of the students that I consider to be high needs were not only students who were below grade level or with autism or on IEPs for behavior, but also students who had problems going on at home, who had their emotions affecting their classroom behavior and emotions. So my literature summaries, I have 5. I'm going to try and be pretty brief with them so that we can kind of get through this in good time. So can money or other rewards motivate students was the first one. So the paper discussed the idea of peer rewards being a possible method of ensuring student motivation. So with education, the costs are up front, so time and effort, and while benefits are delayed and sometimes difficult to grasp, short-term extrinsic rewards can help to balance that discrepancy. So even if students are only doing something for reward, like homework or studying, they're at least still doing it as opposed to doing nothing at all, which I don't really see the value of that at all if the student isn't really seeing it as meaningful work. And rewards can also be used to teach financial literacy, which is really, really, really great. But I think it shouldn't really be done unless the students already have that intrinsic motivation mind frame introduced to them. Otherwise, it can kind of get lost. And also, if students only rely on extrinsic motivation, they don't know how to help themselves, it can create problems. So will the behavior continue once the reward's gone, and are students simply just being trained to respond to an extrinsic reward and not do anything otherwise? And having them rely on extrinsic rewards doesn't create the resilience and independence that we should be teaching them, and that will ultimately help them to succeed. The second one was a better way to motivate achievement. So it talked about how extrinsic motivation only works in a limited set of circumstances, if at all. So it doesn't always work. And it talked about 3 elements that do a better job of motivating us intrinsically. So the first one was autonomy, which means that we have the ability to do a task without being guided every step of the way. We have some voice and choice in how we accomplish the task. Mastery, so trying to get really good at something based on the belief that growth and effort trump innate talent. And purpose, so the task is really important to us. People have been most successful with these 3 conditions have been effectively cultivated, and this approach provoked high levels of encouragement, inspiration, hope, hard work, positive relationships, and new solutions to old problems in some of the most struggling schools. The third one was, do you really know how to motivate children? In this article, it found that extrinsic rewards deteriorated motivation and that extrinsic motivation is inferior to intrinsic motivation. So Green and Lepper, 1974, found that using incentives in the classroom eventually became less interesting to students and would backfire, causing students' intrinsic interests to be undermined in multiple studies. And it said that extrinsic motivation, if it needs to be used, should be powerful enough to control behavior, but not to overpower, and should be phased out before intrinsic motivation is lost. The fourth one, increasing elementary and high school student motivation through the use of intrinsic and extrinsic rewards. It discussed how self-esteem was improved and overall motivation increased due to the praise, recognition, and cooperative learning strategies. So they found that participation was directly linked to performance, which makes sense, that levels of proficiency improved as well. So as students became more confident in their own abilities, they participated more in class in order to obtain praise from the teacher and respect from their peers. And reinforcement and support also obtained from the teacher and peers through collaborative learning strategies, thus increasing their self-concepts. Extrinsic incentives proved to be short-lived, and many students reverted back to their previous states of motivation. Giving students verbal and written praise proved to be beneficial towards intrinsic motivation and student success, which is one of my core values. And the last one was project-based learning for the 21st century. So it talks about how the element of choice is crucial for student success. And differentiation allows students to develop their own interests and pursue deeper learning. It also allows students to soar and learn at their own levels. So it talked about how intrinsic motivation, students will often reach higher and attempt to read more challenging material to glean the information that they seek. So it contended that students' motivation to learn their discipline and their willingness to work on their projects for longer hours indicated that they behaved like high achievers. And that scaffolding instruction occurs in project-based learning when teachers use organizers that aid students in bridging gaps that exist in knowledge and skill, and it makes the tasks manageable and achievable. So my research plan, the data sources I selected were journals, interviews, and records and artifacts. I chose these 3 because they are individual student-centered and they are coming from the student directly, as opposed to something like an observation, which is something that I would be doing and making judgments on. And all of them have a lot of great strengths. The one that was the most important to me was the fact that they were all coming from the student directly. So they were right from the student, and it wasn't anything that I was being judgmental or biased about. Triangulation of data. So in order to ensure validity and reliability in the data I'll collect, I'll have to ensure that biases and judgments are aside while collecting and analyzing it. I'll have to ensure that I'm not reaching for the answer by interpreting the results in a way that will favor the results or that I want, or by trying to get participants to say certain things, or interpreting what they say in a way other than what was intended, but rather interpret the results in a neutral way. When collecting artifacts and existing data, I need to ensure that all of it is considered, and again, not just the data that will favor the response that I want. I also have to make sure that the data is coming directly from the student through my sources of data collection. So data collection is individualized to the student. And participants and settings. So there isn't really a specific group or grade of students. I think it's just something that should be implemented at a young age so that students grow with this mind frame. And at the same time, if they're not growing with that mind frame, it should be instilled in like grade 7 or 8 when the students are preparing for high school and determining their post-secondary path. This strategy would work well for both struggling and academically successful students. In terms of involvement, colleagues who are also interacting with the students, so if they're teaching them during Rotary will be involved, and the data will be collected in the classroom setting. So my research plan. So interviews. Well, actually, the whole timeline, I'm thinking like first term, September to December. So interviews would be conducted 3 times throughout the research period. So once in September before the research starts to get a baseline of the student, identify which strategies to put in place, and then midway through the research period, so approximately like late October, early November, to determine if there's any changes and if any changes need to be made in terms of strategies. And then once at the very end in December. Journals can be done weekly, so the student has frequent opportunities to reflect and be aware of their intrinsic motivation. And then records and artifacts will also be collected weekly. At the beginning of the research period, past records like report cards and whatnot will be collected and used as data, and then after that, just student works will be collected weekly. And ethical considerations to ensure confidentiality, I'll protect the anonymity of my subject by not using their actual name. When referring to or sharing their data, I will keep any records and written information in a safe place that isn't readily available to other students and or staff members who are not involved in the research process, and I'll keep myself informed of all the laws and regulations of regarding and handling of personal information. So that was super fast. I know I flew through it. I had so much more information. But this action research project really supported my knowledge of teaching, and that I now realize how important it is to ensure that your students are motivated and provided with the proper strategies to become intrinsically motivated. And it really helped me to visualize further what I'd like for my students in my future classroom. And I think it's important to reward our students, but at the same time we need to make sure that we are building independence and resilience in them so that they have the tools that they need to be successful, especially when we aren't always around to be giving them these rewards. So they know the little things in life to reward themselves so they can get through things. So, thanks for listening. If you have any questions or would like extra information, just contact me and I'll send you the script. Thanks!